Hello, and welcome to Divorce Talk. I'm Lori McShane, a certified divorce specialist, and today we'll be exploring one of the most crucial parts of the divorce journey, the beginning, middle, and rebuilding phases of a divorce. Going through a divorce can be an emotionally overwhelming experience, but having the clarity on what to expect at each stage can help make the process smoother. I'm joined today by our incredible panel of experts. We have Donald Schweitzer, Managing Partner and Certified Family Law Specialist from Schweitzer Law Partners, and Stephen Unruh, a licensed marriage and family therapist and divorce mediator. Joining us as our special guest is Holly Freeling, a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified EMDR therapist. Holly works with clients across California and coaches worldwide. And today, we'll dive into the different stages of the divorce journey, beginning with how do you know when a marriage is really over, and navigating the emotional turmoil in the middle of it, and finally, rebuilding your life and finding your balance after the divorce is finalized. So let's get started. One of the toughest parts of a divorce is knowing when a marriage is truly over, right, Holly?
Yeah.
What are some of the emotional signs that indicate it might be time to consider a divorce rather than just, a rough patch?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most important questions. Are you really ready? Are you really sure? It's a huge life decision. One of the things I can teach you is what we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. How do we know when it's over? When you start seeing these things very frequently, one of them being criticism. Now, you can have a complaint, you can have something you want to be different, but when you start attacking someone's character, that's a sign of criticism. The second of the 4 horsemen is contempt. Contempt is the worst of the 4. It's one step up from criticism. You're really attacking or tearing somebody down in the process. Can be quiet, can just be a, ugh. It can be eye rolls. We can predict divorce based on the number of eye rolls. Isn't that fascinating? Humor, I love humor, as y'all know. But humor can be cutting too. It can be used as a weapon. And sometimes when someone is contemptuous with you, I mean, obviously yelling, screaming, all that is contempt also. So we have criticism, contempt, and then we have defensiveness. Now, defensiveness is the most normal of the 4. Everyone's going to get defensive sometimes, but particularly in response to criticism. If you have someone who's criticizing you a lot, you're likely to get defensive. So try to take responsibility for what's yours. You don't have to overtake responsibility or undertake responsibility. If you overtake responsibility and you're always falling on the sword, you're likely to get resentful over time. So we don't want to do that either. But then stonewalling is the last one. When you're pulling yourself out of the marriage frequently, either by silence, acting busy, deflecting, responding to a detail rather than what was really said. Those are examples of stonewalling. Now, of course, you're going to see these. Everybody does them from time to time. But when the 4 horsemen are taking kind of permanent residence in your relationship and you've tried, that's the other thing. Have you really tried to own your part? Have you tried to, really work it out with your partner? Or is it just these 4 horsemen are just constantly there and you just feel like you can't thrive anymore, it's a high conflict marriage, sometimes that's a time to leave. It's tough to decide though.
Yes, that's so great about the 4 horsemen. I never really thought about that when, I was, going through a situation like that.
Yeah.
So, what about you, Dawn? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad Holly has a way of making people understand when it's over with, because that's very important in California family law. In California law, the date of separation means when one of the parties believes that the relationship is completely over with and there's no hope of reconciliation. And the consequence of that is big. Number one is it could impact the length of the marriage. And we know that long-term marriages versus short-term marriages, will determine how much or how long spousal support is going to be ordered. The other thing is that the property rights of parties and the liabilities. So the date of separation cuts off the accumulation of community property and community debt. So a party needs to sit back and say, is it good for me to be separated? Is it really over with? And then once you determine that, you've got to figure out whether or not you want to proceed with the divorce, because there could be some strategic reasons to hold back. But ultimately, at that point, when you determine what the date of separation is, Lori, really what people should be doing is accumulating their documents and making sure that they don't do anything that's going to cause some real problems later on, because that point in time, as we see it, is the most volatile time where people make the biggest mistakes. Restraining orders happen, people do things that cause sanctions, so people need to kind of hold back and have some self-control, and if they can't do it by themselves, go and get some friends or somebody that's going to help them get through that journey.
Yeah, Don, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, especially the volatility when someone decides to get a divorce. The decisions they make are really crucial and can have lasting impact. And you're right, maybe seeing someone like Holly, a professional, to help them get counseling through that process. One of the things I thought of with when is it not just a rough patch, but it might be time to get a divorce, is if something hasn't changed in years and you've had all this therapy, you've had all this help, you've begged and pleaded, you've explained yourself 100 times, at some point we have to realize that this individual might not change. And sadly, there are people who don't change, who don't have that capacity, who don't have that self-insight. And so eventually you have to maybe decide that I don't think anything is going to change. And you might need an expert to help you figure that out.
Yeah, I think that Holly would probably absolutely agree with that. One of the things I told my clients is what's it going to look like 10 years from now?
Yes.
Are things going to change? Because you're going to get older, okay? But the problems are still going to be there.
Yeah, it's interesting because we think of divorce as being such a culturally, it's a no-no, right? We love entrances. Somebody got married, they're having a baby. We don't like talking about divorce. We don't like talking about exits. We don't like talking about death or divorce. But there really are times when it's the best thing that could ever happen to you.
Yeah.
There really are for some people. But a lot of times you can be sad too. That's the questioning phase, is it the right thing to do or not? Might you regret it?
So now, Holly, we are in the middle of the divorce. And this is where the emotions, they run the highest. And mistakes can easily be made. What advice do you have for people to keep themselves grounded during this, sort of chaotic stage?
Yeah, I have some good ones on that one. First of all, you have to have a team. Don't make that mistake. Get your, when you've made the decision, even before you file, get an attorney, know your logins, your passwords, your finances, get your ducks in a row, just in case things go sideways. I've even seen cases where we really think it's going to go very well and it doesn't. I've seen it go the opposite way. But I have a phrase, I have a little Holly meme, which is peaceful, swift, and fair. Peaceful, swift, and fair. If you've made the decision, try your very best to keep it peaceful, be cordial. You don't have to be friends anymore. If you've made the decision, get it done. Just handle it and keep it fair. Fair to you, fair to them. So don't go giving away things that are rightfully yours either because you want to get it over with. That's a big regret I see later on, because sometimes in the middle of the heat of the moment, there's all that emotion. I just want it finished, just take it. So be careful with that. But also a big thing is don't rehash the past. If you've made the decision, don't go talking about your relationship anymore. It's really not going to do you any good. You've made the decision, you're likely to fight. So for example, if you have children and you have to interact with them, just keep the conversation on co-parenting. Don't rehash the relationship a bunch of times, if that makes sense. Oh, and get some good friends.
I definitely agree with you on that. So Stephen, you often see couples in this stage during mediation, I would imagine.
Yeah.
How do you help them when they feel things are out of control going through mediation?
That's a great question. As a mediator, I also have a background in psychology, and so when things are really intense, I try to give them boundaries and specific rules of engagement. And so you might have a situation where someone is very antagonistic, very hostile. I educate my clients, I educate both of them throughout this entire process, as I know all of us do. And part of the education is to say to them, if you cannot have a normal conversation, keep it in mediation. You know, if it's an amicable divorce, then I encourage them, go ahead and have a conversation, talk about the options for the property that we've looked at. But when it's really hostile, I say, you've got to keep these conversations in the mediation room. The other thing is when someone is attacking, if you can pull back and simply say, good luck with that, or we'll talk about that later, or, well, you know, I'm not going to have this conversation. So there are ways to step out of that craziness and that chaos, that constant conflict, by not engaging. Because that constantly explaining yourself one more time isn't going to solve it.
Yeah, and Dawn, what are some legal pitfalls to avoid during this emotionally charged time?
Now, there's a lot of them. You know what, before I answer that question directly, let me say that I'm very privileged to be in between two experts on psychology, because one of the things that I notice is that there's patterns of behavior, you know, in people that are going through a divorce. And the two emotions that I almost always see is either fear or resentment. You know, I see those type of things. That resentment a lot of times turns into anger. And what happens is during the process of a divorce, people make really bad decisions when they're letting their emotions dictate, you know, what they should be doing. So what I think people should know is that there's fiduciary duties that still last until parties are completely divorced. And the failure to comply with your fiduciary duties, meaning if you're stealing, transferring, you know, you're covering up, or you're doing something that sabotage property or even hurt the children in a way, you could be severely sanctioned for that. You know, and so what I try to tell my clients is, look, what you're going through is very natural. It's the hardest thing that you'll probably ever experience, but let's pull it back and see if we can comply. Follow my advice, you're going to get through this process. But if you don't, and you start taking unreasonable positions, and you start asking for the impossible, it's going to be way more expensive, and you're not going to feel as good, you know, when you get out of this thing.
Yeah.
I see.
And I think the issue of getting good advice like that, you're right, telling them about their fiduciary responsibility. And unfortunately, in situations like this, people get very bad advice. Their brother-in-law is an attorney, or their best friend tells them what to do, or they hear some story that they don't even know it's true. And so by having really inappropriate information, they make huge mistakes, which later on will cost them.
So now, once the divorce is finalized, the hardest part for many people is figuring out how to start over. Holly, how can someone begin to rebuild emotionally after the process is complete?
I think that's a great question, and it's my favorite part.
Me too.
Yeah, right? You get to have a whole new life. You get to create a whole new story for yourself. You get to think about what you want. Like, one of the greatest things, I think, is that you get you back. And you get to start to decide, what do I like? What do I really want aside from what my partner wanted or what you had to do? You get to create a whole new chapter, and you're probably a different person than you were when you first got married. So you get to have this exciting time of rebirth and to really reframe that story in that way of rebirth. The other thing I think is really important is that in 5 years, 86% of people who got divorced get remarried.
Wow.
So the truth is, we all want it. We all know it's hard. We know the statistics are pretty much against us, but we want it. So we have to learn how to do it better. So try to really figure out what your part in it was, how you could improve, how you could potentially work with a new partner. If you want one, maybe you don't want one. Some people really are happier alone, having a group of friends and all that, you know, get social. But think about rebuilding your life, what you want it to look like, and try not to make the same mistakes again if you can. But it's a time of, you really should look at it as a time of joy and happiness.
I love that. And Dawn?
Yeah, I like to tell people that I hope to meet them at a Starbucks a year after the divorce is done, where I can see the true person. because really getting to the finish line and getting on with your life, as Holly says, is an opportunity for immense growth. And it's an opportunity to learn who you really are. Kind of introduce yourself again, because during a bad divorce, you kind of forget, all the good things about yourself. A lot of people think that divorce is a moral issue, right? That there's some shame or that they're not successful because the marriage wasn't successful. The truth of the matter is, as Holly stated, is that there's a lot of people that unfortunately have to go through that. And, it's just part of it. But if you look at it in the right way, and I try to tell my clients this, Steve, right at the very beginning, is if you get to the end, you're going to be in this enormous growth period, and you're going to love that. But there are some things that you got to consider, though. Is just because you're divorced doesn't mean that you're finished with the divorce, really, because there's some post-judgment things that have to be done, such as transferring deeds, transferring other property. If you've got children, you're going to be part of that person's life for the rest of your life, and that's the opportunity for you to learn how to cope with the aftermath. And that's not always easy for people either, Steve.
It's not, right. Yeah, especially. You really have to, after your divorce, you have to move on. You don't need to be spending any more energy trying to prove your point that you really were an alcoholic, or you really were horrible, or you really were something. You have to let go of trying to prove that you were right. You're divorced now. And it's really hard to let go of that agenda, but that agenda is over. And the goal is for you to really get the support and help that you need and look into the future. And I can say this summer, I got on my phone a photograph of a woman in a wedding dress. I'm like, okay, what is that? And it was a former client who got remarried. And it was just this beautiful story that we helped mediate through their divorce, that she's now remarried and incredibly happy, and her kids were there. I'd met her kids as we mediated. And so it's that kind of story that you want, whether you get remarried or not.
But let's recognize that not everybody follows our advice,
Yeah.
right? And there's some people that will be in a litigious divorce or in a custody
Right.
battle for the
Yeah.
rest of their lives, and
Yeah.
that's a sad story.
It
and
is,
that
right.
we need to reflect on. And hopefully, Holly, when we talk to people, we talk to them about what could happen to them if they don't move on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another thing too is just ask your family and friends to not tell you what's going on in the other person's life.
Wow.
Just I
agree with
I
that,
wish them well.
100%.
I don't really want to hear it. It's just a waste of my energy. Maybe don't check up on them on social media. Maybe even block them if you want to, or it gets a little stickier if you still have children. But just try to keep looking forward and just let it go. But you might have to work through a lot of bitterness, because some divorces are really tough, and there's a lot of unfairness.
What about forgiveness? What about, emotionally forgiving yourself for the past? Because you can't move on unless you forgive, right?
Yes and no. I
No?
mean, I think
Okay.
some things really are unforgivable. I know therapists are all supposed to say, forgive and all that. And I think it is an important piece if you can, but there are some things that just are not forgivable, and you still can move on.
Yes.
You can still put it behind you. But I think that is the big piece, is have some resolution and move forward with your life. All that energy you're spending on guilt or anger or resentment is energy you're not spending on yourself and your health and rebuilding and your future, or your children or your family or your friends, or all these other wonderful things that you could be doing.
Laura, you were talking about forgiveness, and when I tend to think of that, I think you can forgive yourself after a while, right? Because we all make mistakes. Nobody lives a perfect life, and there's no marriage that's perfect, and we all make mistakes in relationships. So you could do that, and that process, I think, is very healthy. But what you can't do is try to force somebody else to forgive you,
Right.
because we don't have control over other people, and that's the dynamic that people get into, is that power and control thing where you're trying to control that person, or insert your beliefs on that person and say you should forgive me, right? Because people they're entitled to feel the way that they do, right, Steve?
That's right. You can go to someone later on and you can apologize, and they may or may not accept it, but you've done your part. And I think for a lot of people, maybe for all of us, forgiveness is a journey. And we can maybe say it, and then a week later we say it again, and a year later we say it again. It really is a journey, it's a process. And you might have a memory that comes back up for you, and suddenly that's overwhelming, it's painful. Deal with that memory, talk to someone about that memory, And then as you are able to come out of it, you might have to kind of go through this idea of forgiving that person again. So it's really a long process to forgive someone.
Yeah.
Lori, I think that when people have children, and let's say they have substance abuse problems, and they want to be forgiven, or at least they want to forgive themselves, post-divorce is a good opportunity to take care of those type of problems, addictions and things like that, and let the people know at least, that you've recognized the problem and you've done whatever you can to try to repatch the situation.
Yeah.
And it's especially difficult when someone doesn't do that, when they don't get the help they need. You have to be able to quit rescuing them. Maybe the kids see things that are really painful and hurtful, but you're done. You have to move on with your life. And if they're still struggling, if they're still blaming, if they're still the victim, or whatever they're involved in, you have to leave them alone.
Yeah. So, Holly, before we close, I'd love for you to share some final thoughts and what are the most important things for someone to focus on when trying to heal and move forward after a divorce?
Well, everybody's different. And I do think, again, go back and look at your part. You don't want to repeat it again. But I do think, taking care of yourself is really important. A lot of times people put themselves aside for a while, or maybe when you're going through the divorce, you're turning towards food or whatever. Get yourself together. It feels really great. Think about who you want to be in the world. Maybe even getting some new clothing, getting a better group of friends, or even some old friends that you haven't spoken to because you've been so busy. Getting your whole social circle back together. Rebuilding your sense of joy and happiness and the things that make you feel fulfilled in the world. Because a lot of times you're busy, you're overwhelmed, and you're busy, or you don't want to call someone because you're just kind of brimming with all this stuff. Reconnect with people and get your life back together in that way. Oh, and get ready to date again.
Oh,
That's a little scary, if maybe you've been married for 20, 30, 40 years, and the thought of being intimate with someone can be a little intimidating, or even going on a date can be a little scary, so kind of get ready for that. Most people do repartner, so that's another
based
thing.
on the statistics that you mentioned earlier.
Correct.
What was it, 86%?
86% remarry within 5 years.
Wow.
There's nothing more healing than to have somebody that sees and appreciates you for who you are, rather than that bad relationship that you were in, right?
Oh, you're just not kidding.
Yeah.
You're not kidding. It really is the most, and when you get it right, it's incredible. It's amazing. It's the most beautiful thing on earth when you get it right, which is why we all pursue it. We want it so much. So,
And I love your point about getting back into the world, because especially recovering from the culture that we were in just a few years ago, people isolate.
yes.
And after divorce, some people tend to just pull back, they're hurting, and they isolate, which is very dangerous. It's difficult, but hopefully if they're getting the professional help that they need, they'll not isolate, and they'll try to just get out there and meet friends or get involved in their temple, their church, their community. But in some ways, you've got to be around people.
Yeah. Even someone who's just take up a new hobby. You may know nobody there,
Yeah.
Like dancing?
You could, there are dancing things.
Especially
you can go
dancing,
to. He likes to
yes.
dance.
Or MMA,
Okay, I'll go with that too.
Boxing,
Although that's not as,
kickboxing,
that's
that
not as
takes out
romantic.
Exactly, it might be
aggression out.
kickboxing for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Feeling
definitely.
empowered.
Empowered, working out, focusing on self-help and wellness, and really just rebuilding your life afterwards. It's just,
Right.
it's so
And if you need
amazing.
help with it, get a nutritionist, a dietitian, get a trainer, take lessons with somebody who does something you really want to do very well. Like it's really fun.
Yeah, and I think that we have to, if you have some responsibility, if you're getting into new relationships, make sure you're doing it responsibly, right?
Yes.
Because if you're doing it to patch feelings or cover or mask your feelings, you can end up hurting other people. And so, to me, what I try to tell my clients is, look, date, go meet other people and stuff, but be real with them, and don't take advantage of people, right?
Oh, I think that's a really good point, because nobody wants to date someone who's obsessed with their ex.
Yes.
So
right,
don't be that
right,
person.
Right.
Yeah.
Take the time you need to just heal and take care of yourself. That's what I mean when I say like get ready to date.
Yeah.
But be ready. That's a really, really good point.
Thank you all for joining and being here today.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
great.
you for
It's
putting
been
this together.
Very
This is great.
enjoyable and good
Yes.
information. Yeah.
So, and also thank you all for joining us today on Divorce Talk. We hope today's conversation has given you a clearer understanding of how to navigate each stage of the divorce journey, from recognizing when it's over to managing the chaos in the middle, and finally, rebuilding your life afterward. And if there's a specific topic you'd like us to cover in future episodes, visit DivorceTalk.show. We're here to help you. And until next time, take care, and remember, you have the power to start fresh and create a new chapter.